Christians and politics, how far do we get involved or stay out? We'll start in Charlotte. Philip, welcome to the Line of Fire. What's your take?
First, I'll say I used to be one of the most politically active people you would ever meet. I would write open letters. I had letters circulated around the Cato Institute, for example. I had people contact me about running for public office myself, but when I became a believer 4 years ago, I found it no longer compatible.
No longer compatible. That's interesting. All right, so I'm really interested to hear this. So you would write a letter to the editor, say, about an issue. Let's say there was an issue in the school system in the city, and you would write a letter to the editor about that, but now as a Christian, you feel it's not compatible?
No, I mean, I look at the New Testament church, especially under Paul. Paul left all of that behind. You could argue that him being, part of the being a Pharisee of Pharisees, he left part of that behind, and Jesus didn't leave as an admonition to his disciples to get involved in the local Sanhedrin, for example. It was
all right, but the local. But Paul was not part of the Sanhedrin. Paul was a religious Jew, and he still was. Right. But okay, so I'm curious to know though, what's not compatible? I mean, Jesus did say that we're the salt of the earth and we're the light of the world. So we come back. I want to hear. I'm curious to understand your thinking here as to them not being compatible. It's one thing if you said you just didn't have a burden to do it anymore, but to say it wasn't compatible, I'm curious about that. All right, we'll be right back. Stay there. Thanks for joining us. 866-348-7884. Yeah, Joey, grab clip number 4. This is a question that came up during this Q&A TV show about redefining marriage. It's an audience member, Rob Ward. Clip number 4.
Given the treatment given to Archbishop Porteous in Tasmania, where for the crime of stating Catholic Orthodox position and in fact supporting current law with a very benign and mild brochure, he's been dragged before the Anti-Discrimination Commission. How can we possibly have a free and honest debate? We've got a snowflake's chance in hell. In fact, the bigotry shown towards Lyle in this place tonight, the laughter shown towards him, shows we haven't got a chance. So,
okay,
what's the alternative? Those who support same-sex marriage and the rest of us are bigots?
Right. So the question is that when you have different forces in society trying to steal our religious liberties and what they say is a cause of equality or tolerance, do we not stand up for what's right? And did not Paul use his Roman citizenship whenever it was appropriate in the book of Acts, and even appeal to speak directly to the government? So, Philip, again, I'm not questioning your own walk with the Lord or what you feel God's laid on your heart or not. I'm just questioning the biblical basis. You have men like Daniel, Joseph in the Old Testament raised up to play significant roles in governing and directing countries. And again, you have New Testament calling for us to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world, to be a moral conscience, etc. Paul appeals to his Roman citizenship when appropriate. So I just, and then you see the stealing of religious rights. We have responsibility to our kids and grandkids. We know what our nation was founded on, principles we were founded on, religious freedoms being right at the top, and countries like America, countries like Australia, those are being threatened. So again, I'm just trying to get inside your mind and understand why you feel that getting involved, standing up, fighting for the lives of the unborn, fighting against slavery, why none of these things are compatible with being a Christian.
Well, you bring up the point of Paul and using his Roman citizenship. Let's look at that in context. Did he use his Roman citizenship to affect policy change? No, he used it as a means to an end. He was going to be put to death by Judaizers and Jews had he not evoked that. It was a measure in order to spread the gospel. It wasn't a measure to affect
what policy change could you enact in Rome? There was no such thing, but the early Christians fought against infanticide. We know they did that. They risked their lives to rescue babies.
Okay.
So that,
but that
changed.
Do it through any kind of political system.
There was no political system. There was a dictator. But Philip, there was no political system. There was a dictator. You had no context.
I understand that, but let me ask you this: where is our citizenship?
Our ultimate
According to
citizenship
Scripture, where is our citizenship?
in heaven. Therefore, we do our best to support the nation where we are. Our citizenship.
What is our role now? We're ambassadors. Do
Ambassadors
get involved in foreign soil and political issues?
All right, here's the thing. We are called to speak righteousness. We are called to be prophetic voices. What happens when that intersects with politics? So it would have been wrong to oppose slavery, you're saying?
No, but you don't do it, I don't think, through the political system. You voice that it's wrong.
You voice that it's wrong,
gospel,
and you
which teaches that it's wrong.
And you do nothing else?
Let me give you a good example.
Okay, hang on, Philip. Did Paul say that we're supposed to pray for kings, rulers, leaders, to pray for their salvation?
Yep.
So once they get saved, they have to.
We should do that with everyone. But
okay, so once they get saved, they. But Philip, hang on. You pray for a king to get saved. You pray for a political leader to get saved. You pray for a president to get saved. When they get saved, they now resign because they're Christians.
It becomes a matter of conscience for them, I guess. But I think that would have a huge impact for the gospel if they did, wouldn't it?
Of course, exactly, and that's why a Christian should run for office for that very reason. Exactly. Why are we, Philip? Why are we praying for them? Philip, why are we praying for them? If God does not want Christians to get involved in politics or in government, why are we praying for their salvation? It's not just so that we can have freedom to preach because we have a nice guy in office. There again, my issues. You say it's not compatible.
Two things I would say is that one, when Christ returns, it isn't to congratulate us on ushering His kingdom in through political change. He's coming back to wipe the slate clean of the government regimes that exist on this planet.
What does that have to do with slavery? What does that have to do with slavery in the 1800s or 55 million? What does that have to do with slavery in the 1800s or 55 million babies aborted in our generation? Fine.
What does that have to do with it? With Christ ushering in a kingdom of righteousness? What does it have to do with
what I'm supposed to do today about the slaughter of the unborn, sir? What does it have to do what reformers dealt with in the 1800s with slavery? In other words, yes, when Jesus returns, he destroys the wicked on the earth and he establishes his righteous kingdom. Until then, we are his voice on the earth. We follow the principle of Jeremiah, the 29th chapter. And we pray for the places where we live because as they do well, we do well. We are in this world, but not of it. You basically want to be in...
You're mixing administrations, Dr. Brown. And I'll tell you another thing that Christianity has done with churches. Churches have put themselves into Caesar's grip by making the exchange of we won't pay taxes, we're going to take a 501c3 status, and then they jump up and down and say, well, government doesn't have the right to tell us what we can say from our pulpit. I'm sorry, you made that exchange. You made a deal with the devil
so let's
501c3 status.
Why is it a deal with the devil? You're saying that's a deal with God. You're saying we shouldn't be engaged in those, and now you're calling it a deal with the devil if we agree with your theology,
if
sir.
you join with federal government, if you make an exchange of saying...
Okay, so we cancel that exchange. We cancel that. We'll be 501c4, or we won't be incorporated at all. We don't have any tax exemption. Now you agree we should speak openly about political issues.
You speak the gospel, you speak righteousness, you speak what shouldn't be done. That changes hearts and minds.
And then you appeal to elected officials. You call on them to do what's right. And when you have the opportunity to vote, and you have a godly candidate versus an ungodly candidate, and one stands for righteousness and the other opposes it, you stand for righteousness. And if the Lord lays it on your heart to be a Daniel or a Joseph in your generation, or to be a Joseph of Arimathea in that generation, then you stand and get involved with leadership. Don't say it's not compatible.
I think we're mixing administrations here. It's not what was with Daniel with being Israel is not akin at all to what we have.
He was in exile. He was in exile, and God raised him up to make a difference in that government. And the same thing with Joseph. God raised up Joseph in exile. These are our paradigms, sir, that we are living in exile in this world, but can be raised up to make a difference. Hey, listen, I got a break coming up, but I do appreciate the conversation. And folks on hold, I want to get back to your calls right on the other side of the break, all right? I agree that the gospel comes first. I agree that living godly lives and winning the lost and making disciples comes first. My simple question is always, how do disciples live? So however you've worked this out between you and the Lord, that's between you and the Lord. But it's absolutely compatible to stand for righteousness, to influence political officials, to advocate for righteousness, to be ambassadors of righteousness. Remember, the Bible of the early church was the Old Testament. This was a major prophetic word and calling. Let's be salt. Let's be light. Let's pray for the elections. Let's vote wisely. And if God calls you to run for office, do it. Thank you, sir, for the discussion.